Today's the day we've all been waiting for. Well, at least it's the start of what we've been all waiting for, is to get to the answer in Sefer Iyov. So let's review what we did last time, which was just setting up the answer, and based on the Rambam and more Nevuchim. So we read the Rambam setup last time, and we did a bullet point outline, which was, first thing is Elihu's answer repeats Eliphaz's build-out so far in order to conceal his true opinion. And why do we want to conceal the true answer in Iyov? People aren't ready for it. We'll just read Iyov and then they'll just get out of it. Like, let's say you're an Eliphaz guy where like you're big on this idea that everything is a punishment. So then you'll just see that as the answer, you know, and you're a build-out, let's say you're a build-out guy where like, oh, God just wants to reward people and that's why he punishes them, or that's why he makes them suffer. You'll read that. And if you're a Sofer guy, oh, we just can't understand God at all, then you'll just read that. So you'll just, basically you'll get out of it. It'll be confirmation bias. You'll get out of Elihu's answer whatever you are prepared to see. And then Hashem gives his answer to back up Elihu. But according to the Rambam, what's the way to find out the true answer of Elihu? What do you have to look for? Pick out the stuff that he says and no one else says. So he says there are three new ideas. One is the idea of the intercession. Yeah, you were right for the ultimate answer, right? Intercession of an angel. He says when a person is close to death, if a malach intercedes on his behalf, any malach whatsoever, then he'll be saved and restored. But this only happens a couple times in your life, okay? Point number two is a description of nevuah, that people will get nevuah to save them from harm's way, but it's only certain people. And then the third part is descriptions of nature. Elihu, majority of his answer is descriptions of nature, and then Hashem is only describing nature, and Hashem's tone is basically like, were you there when I made the moon? Like, do you know how to like make the oceans do their thing? Like, do you know how to do this stuff? And it's all emphasizing that. Okay, so I mentioned that every year I come back to this to try to develop my answer more. My answer largely stems from point number three. We will revisit these other two, I hope, but it's largely from number three. And then here's my disclaimer, which I've been saying all year. So this is going to be my current partial understanding of the Rambam's understanding of the answer in Sefer Iyov. It's not the only answer, and it's not even a complete answer. In fact, what I'm going to do after this is over Shabbos, I read, were you guys ever in school with Rivka Rezel Goldschein?
Oh my gosh, Rivka Rezel. Oh my God, Rivka Rezel, I know.
Oh, you know, fine. Okay, so I think she must have graduated the year before you were freshmen, I think, around there, or maybe two.
No.
Yeah, she was in Aviva's class. Yeah. So was that the year before you came to the school? Yeah. So when Rivka Rezel was in my Iyov class, she shared with me a paper that her grandfather wrote in 1963, where he gave his understanding of the Rambam's understanding of the answer, and it was different than mine. So like, I want to show you, my goal was to go through my understanding and then his understanding, just so you see that there are multiple understandings. But again, this is just the Rambam. Like, Ramban has his own answer, and Sforno has his own answer, and Ralbag has his own answer. There are different answers, and it's a really, really hard to understand book. So like, there's room for stuff. So
who's her grandfather?
His name was Rabbi something Laks, L-A-K-S. And I don't know what I think he was like a scholarly rabbi person, because like, this was like an academic paper. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so just don't walk away saying like, oh, this is the only answer. Oh, okay. All right. Okay, so let's read carefully, okay? This is the Rambam. The goal of describing all these things, now which things is he talking about? Nature, is to impress on our minds that we are unable to comprehend how these transient creations are brought into existence. Transient means, yeah. Oh, I thought you were.
What's the whole thing? Are you saying about? Yeah.
That's transcendent.
I keep doing that.
Yeah. Transient. Transient is a Koheles word. Yeah, they pass out of existence. Yeah, it's the opposite of what you're saying, but related. Yeah, right. So transient means they come into being and pass away, like temporary. Okay. The goal of describing all these things is to impress on our minds that we are unable to comprehend how these transient creations are brought into existence, or to imagine how their natural properties commenced to exist, and that these are not like the things we make. So let's just translate this into English. Okay. When Hashem was telling Iyov, do you know how to make earthquakes? Or do you know how to like produce the stars? What's the point he's emphasizing, according to the Rambam?
You don't.
You don't, right? And why not? Because the stuff that you make is different than the stuff God makes. Okay. How can we think that his management, Hanhaga, and his supervision, hashgacha, over them is at all similar to our management of what we manage and our supervision over what we supervise. Instead, we must stop at this boundary and remain with the conviction that nothing is hidden from him, as Elihu says here, for his eyes are upon all man's ways and he sees all his steps. There's no darkness and no shadow of death where evildoers can be hidden. Okay, so far in your own words, what is he telling Iyov? Can't know what? No, he's not talking about bad things at all.
How can we relate, like, what Hashem does to us, like our, like Hashem's creation of things is different, so he knows, like, if we create something, we wouldn't necessarily know it, but Hashem knows, like, what everything that's happening.
Okay, yeah, so it has to do with Hashem's creations of things, okay? That's the thing, is when God creates something, his creation and his management of the world is different than ours. He hasn't gotten to Iyov suffering yet, okay? Yeah. Now, Ram emphasizes this again, but the term supervision, hashgacha, applied to him is not the same concept as our supervision, nor is his management of his creations the same concept as our management of what we manage. The two concepts are not even included in one and the same definition, as is thought by those who are confused, and there is nothing in common between the two except in name alone. Okay, so just go over this really quickly. I'm sure we've talked about this in Tefillah, but there are terms that are univocal, which means the same. You know what? Maybe I have this on. Hold on. This would be a useful PowerPoint. Let me see if I can find this on my PowerPoint. It's the opposite of equivocal.
I say unknowable in Hebrew.
Unknowable in Hebrew. Like you can't know God, like that kind of unknowable. Good question. I mean, we say, like, we describe it in a sentence like "Ligdulaso ein cheker," like you can't investigate his knowledge, or like "Lo yir ani adam v'chai," man cannot see me and live. You know, I don't know if there's a one word thing like unknowable, like in English. Okay, so this was hold on. This is from a Tefillah PowerPoint. I didn't intend to do this. Oh yeah, here we go. What was it? I know, right, that was for Tefillah. Tefillah and Gemara, I did white PowerPoints. Yeah. So univocal is same term and same meaning. So for example, I picked a pineapple from a pineapple tree. Okay, so in that sentence, you have two words pineapple and they're being used in exactly the same way. Okay, or if I say, for example, like Adina has a pen and I have a pen, we're using the word pen in the same way. Okay, one man said hello to another man. Those are being used in the same way. Okay, I read a newspaper article about newspapers, forgot to bold that one. Then there's analogical terms, same term, different but related meaning. So yeah, you remember this? I gave an apple to my daughter who is the apple of my eye. Apple of my eye is like some precious thing, but you don't mean that like the thing you gave to your daughter is the same. Your daughter is not a literal apple, okay? And there's no apple in your eye, right? But you're using it in the same way because apple is like a small precious thing, okay, right? Or the good man gave a good meal to his good dog. In the case of good man, what do you mean when you call a man good? Morally good, and we call a meal good, tasty, and when you call a dog good, yeah, friendly, obedient, whatever, right? So you're using the same word and it's related in the meaning, but it's not the same way, okay? The man with a sharp knife made a sharp observation. So it has a point and like his observation like had a point, or it was like, you know, okay. Then there is equivocal, which is same term, completely different and entirely unrelated meaning. The farmer used a fountain pen to draw a picture of a pig pen. A pig pen is something that fences in pigs. A pen that he uses to draw is a writing implement. No relationship at all except the word, okay? Like they didn't even derive from the same place, it's just the same word, you know? Or the city had two banks and the river had two banks. The banks of the river is like the shore. Analogical is the same because when we say good, like what are the words good have in common here? It's just, yeah, it's describing something like it is the highest quality of the thing or something like that, you know, like, but you're using good in different ways. So there is a relationship between the terms good, or there's a relationship between the terms sharp knife and sharp mind. Here, there's no relation whatsoever between the two terms. The man holding fruit punch received a punch in the head. Fruit punch is a type of drink. A punch in the head is a type of physical abuse, you know? So there's no terms whatsoever, or no connection whatsoever between the terms except the name. And what's the Rambam saying about God's hashgacha? It's equivocal. Yeah. He's saying that when we say that God supervises us, and when we say that you supervise like the daycare, or the mashgiach supervises the kitchen, The only thing that those have in common is the word, but there's no commonality about how God supervises and how we supervise. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think that's the direction we took it. That when we talk about God, then like we're using completely different terms. Okay. So let's go back to the Iyov thing. Is the meaning? The thing we're trying to get here is the meaning of equivocal. Is that clear? Like same word, but no relation in meaning.
Why do we use that?
Good question. So why do you use that word? Do I include that here?
Yeah, make a new word.
Yeah, right. So you could say that. So the Rambam addresses this. I'm just trying to think if I have this on a PowerPoint. I don't think I do. I actually have it in an email that someone sent me. Hold on. I'm not gonna look at the email right now. Actually, I'll read you the email that I got. I'm not gonna bring up I have to sign into a different email. So hold on. This is my friend Rabbi Yaakov Trachman, who he and I were talking about this topic. I'm looking at the word blarg. Blarg. You'll see why. Yeah, here we go. Blarg. April 30th. Okay. So he says, for many other blah blah blah. Hold on. Okay. When talking about God, then the words we use are completely equivocal. Hold on, I just lost my place. I'm quoting Rabbi Yaakov Trachman. He's talking about the Rambam, but rather than, okay, hold on a second. Oh yeah, so he says from the Rambam, so according to the Rambam, then when you use like the term hand about God, it's completely equivocal. God has no actual hands, okay?
That's not the same thing. God has no actual hands.
So Rambam holds that it is equivocal, okay? That's like the Rambam's position. So Rabbi Trachman says, for the Rambam, from a logical standpoint, would say we might as well say a blarg instead of a hand, because if it has no meaning in common, then like, why are we bothering to stick with physical terms, you know? So he says, we only use a familiar word for pedagogical reasons, for like teaching reasons, to instill an attitude of Yiras Hashem in the children and in the ignorant. So for example, let's take hashgacha, right? So hashgacha literally means supervision, right? So what does it mean in human terms when we say that a human being supervises something? Yeah, looks over it and makes sure that it's functioning smoothly, right? So Rambam here is saying that there is absolutely nothing in common between God's hashgacha and human hashgacha. So the question is, well, why do we even use the term hashgacha at all? So the Rambam's answer is that for people who are on a very low level, like children and ignorant people, then it's a good thing for their Yiras Hashem to make it feel like God is watching them in the same way that like a parent is watching them, you know? But the goal is they'll eventually realize that when we say God is watching you, we mean something completely different than a parent watching you, you know? And you'll realize that like the way God doesn't have eyes, you know, he doesn't gain knowledge through observation, you know, he's not in time where like, if he sees you do something, then his knowledge changes. Like God is on a completely different level and is operating in a completely different way than human beings operate. So the term hashgacha cannot have the same meaning at all. You know, it's just like you all went through this experience, I'm sure, when you had the notion of like God seeing, you know, like when you hear that God is like watching you, I mean, I guess we're using the same thing, but like just with the term re'iyah instead of hashgacha. God watching you, I'm sure when you're really young, you feel the same way about that as like, you know, your teacher's watching you, you know? But like, then you grow older and you realize, well, God doesn't have eyes. He can't be literally watching me. And you realize, well, we must mean something else when we say that like you're being watched by God or seen by God. It can't have anything to do with what we mean by human beings.
I mean, Rambam holds it.
Yeah.
I don't understand it because, like, let's say you say Yad Chazakah, Hashem takes out
right.
time with Yad Chazakah.
Right.
We do say, oh, okay, so how do I relate to Yad Chazakah? Someone who outstretches their arm is like very gracious and whatever. So that aspect is similar, which means it's not unequivocal.
Right. You mean it's not? You mean it's not
equivocal?
Yeah. Right. Meaning it's not equivocal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not equivocal, right? Yeah. Meaning you're saying it sounds much more like it's analogical. That like the Yad Chazakah thing, by the way, with Mitzrayim is strength, and then the Posech HaSidecha Yad is the providing. But I know what you mean, right? Yeah. Yeah. So that sounds like it's analogical, not equivocal.
Yeah.
Right. So I think what the Rambam is saying here, and this is based on my understanding of the Rambam in general, not just like this statement, is like, if you really understood it, you would realize that human power and divine power have nothing in common. Like when you say a human being is powerful, what do you mean? Or let's say Paro's army is powerful. Yeah, it could beat other stuff, you know? But when you say that God is powerful, you know, like let's anyone know what bracha you say that references God's power? Oh yeah, sorry, that's true. That's a better thing. I was thinking bracha on a natural phenomenon because I was thinking along Iyov lines. Yeah, it's one of those. No, close. Shekoko ugrasa maleolam, right? So when do you say that? Thunder, right? When you hear a boom of thunder, you say Shekoko ugrasa maleolam. So God's power and strength fill the world, right? So in that context, and you think about like thunder, you know. And by the way, halakhically, I think you can make Ose Masa Bereshis or Shekoko ugrasa maleolam on either thunder or lightning. Like the minhag is to say Koko ugrasa on thunder, but like this applies equally to lightning. Okay, so what do we mean in that bracha when we say God's power? Like, in what sense does God's power fill the universe? So that is the reaction that we have. But when we say the bracha, we're talking about something actually that is in the universe. So what we mean when we say that, just plain pshat, is that all of the forces of nature are God's power, right? Now think about the term powerful for a human being, that they could like destroy stuff or beat stuff. And like, that is like using, none of that power is really theirs. It's just like they embody it in some way, you know? But then there's God's power in the universe, which is the fact that he is the creator and runner, I'm not runner, like he runs all of the forces in the universe. Like it is of a completely different nature, you know?
But at the end of the day, it evokes the same feeling, which is why we use it in
Right. So I think maybe that's the answer to your question, is it evokes the same feeling, meaning that if a human being did this, then it would have the same impact on us. But what the Rambam is pointing out here is that the way that God manages the universe is completely different than the way we manage stuff. And in this example, I'm saying the nature of God's power is different than the nature of our power. So I think that's the point. And I think that does answer your question. Let me just try to answer it more explicitly here. Is, let's say when we say God is merciful, right, versus a person is merciful. So a person being merciful means that your compassion, your feelings of compassion or empathy are aroused when you see someone, you know, and you're moved. When we say God is merciful, God doesn't have emotions, so we don't mean that. But what we mean is when he behaves towards something by caring for it or saving it or protecting it, that is what a human would do who is moved by mercy. So it is a description of how the action impacts us, but not at all the same in terms of the source of the action or the source of the emotion, because, you know, God doesn't have that emotion.
I just don't like the term critical, but
yeah, I think there still is a question there that is good that you're asking that we need to explore further. But yeah, I hear the question. Yeah? Or do you have a question or not?
It's kind of like off topic.
Okay. Okay, so let's go on. In the same way, our actions do not resemble his actions, and the two are not comprised in one and the same definition. Okay, this is a good example. This might help. Just as natural acts differ from those of craftsmanship, so do God's management, hanhaga, supervision, hashgacha, intention, kavana, in these natural phenomena differ from our management, supervision, and intention of what we manage, supervise, and intend. Very long sentence, okay? But let's just focus on the craftsmanship thing, okay? We use the term malacha to describe let's say Shabbos malachos, okay? Let's say like you build a birdhouse, okay? So you did malacha of boneh, okay? But we also use malacha to describe God's creation of the universe, okay? So the question is, what do the two have in common? And the answer that the Rambam, what's the answer the Rambam saying? Nothing, okay, right? Nothing. Now, that's gonna get us back to the original question about like, well, then why do we use the same word? But let's just take a moment to appreciate that. What is different about how you build a birdhouse from how God creates the universe? Yes. So the main difference is that he builds from nothing and we build from something. Okay. And what else is involved in his, so that has to do with like the material of the thing. And what else is different in God's creation that is not present in ours?
there's nothing under the sun, then there's something.
Yes. Okay. That's also true. Can we get that a little bit just clear about what we mean by that? Because that's a good application of the pasuk. But
Different. I don't
sure,
know
go ahead. Yeah.
What you're saying, but we have to like exert energy, and it's a loss on us.
That's also true. Yeah. Okay. That's also true. It's like we yeah. I wasn't even thinking about that. We expend energy to do it. That's what physics definition of work, I guess. But yeah. So God is also, when he created the universe, he's creating the laws of nature through which allow for birdhouses to exist. We are just like taking the material and like aligning it with those laws. Like when you stack something, you're using gravity, right? To like make the stability. Or like when you use wood, when you hammer a nail into the wood, you're using the physical properties of force to drive the nail into the wood, and like iron has certain properties. God created the material and he created all the laws that govern the material. So nothing in your act of creation is at all what God did when he created it. And what God does is not at all what you're doing. We use the same word because there are certain similar features in the sense of like we feel that we produce something, and like God actually produced something, but it's just based on our feeling. Like there's nothing new under the sun. We didn't actually produce anything. You just rearranged material. So that's why we use the same word, but the nature of their actions are completely different. And he's saying this is true for God's malacha, God's hashgacha, and God's kavana. Okay, when you intend to do something, what does that mean? Like, what is intention? Yeah, I'd say like I don't know exactly how to define it, but it's like a desire that translates into a will that moves your action or something like that. When you say God intends for something, that obviously has nothing to do with will or desire, because God doesn't have will or desire, like an actual will inside of him. God does. When we say a will, it's like a force within us that moves us to do stuff. God is one. He doesn't have like desires, so it's a completely different like thing, give me an example of where we would say like God's intention, like, and like, let's see what that would mean. Like, okay, God's intention to take us out of Egypt, right? So there, what do we mean by intention? If we don't mean God was moved to take us out of Egypt, right? Okay, so it could be an analogy in terms of like, just like when you have an intelligent being who says they're going to do something and then does it, then that reflects intention. So too, God made a promise and then he carried out that promise, and maybe that's what it means by intention. So that has nothing to do with what's going on in God, so to speak, because there's no in God, but in terms of like how it played out. Okay, that's good explanation. I was going to say something different, but I like yours also. Yeah, could be the function of the thing, right? I was thinking the example of like, what is God's intention in like giving us lungs? So what we mean by that is, what do the lungs do? How do they function in the body? How do they fit into the design of us? Not what does God want? All right, ready for the most important line? Okay, this is the purpose of the entire book of Iyov as a whole, namely the establishing of this foundational concept and the drawing of attention to the inference to be drawn from natural matters, so that you should not err and seek to affirm in your imagination that his knowledge, yediyah, is like our knowledge, or that his intention, kavana, supervision, hashgacha, and management, hanhaga, are like our intention, supervision, and management. He's saying the point of the whole thing in Iyov is to make sure that you know that God's knowledge, intention, supervision, and management are not at all like ours. Okay? That's the point of the whole book of Iyov, which implies, what mistake was Iyov making? He thought it is like that. And that's the same thing that Eliphaz and Bildad and Sophar were making. That they were making a mistake about how God operates, and all of their false ideas were coming from comparisons to the way God operates, the way humans operate, and that's what led each of them to their false conclusions. Like, do you remember the flow chart that we had with Iyov before of saying like, well, if God knows about it and doesn't do anything, then that either means that he lacks the ability, or that he has the ability and doesn't care, or that he's evil. And then that's like that whole line of reasoning led Iyov to deny God's hashgacha. That was based on this comparison that God's supervision is like our supervision. He was just putting in the same category. And what Hashem and Elihu, what really Elihu and Hashem are telling Iyov is like, no, like look at how God creates stuff and look at how God runs stuff. It has nothing to do with how human beings do. Okay? Yeah. There's more. Oh, so okay, here we go. So here's my summary. The goal of describing these natural phenomena is to underscore the difference between our actions and his actions. They're only the same in name alone. This is the purpose of Sefer Iyov as a whole, to differentiate his knowledge, intention, supervision, and management from ours. Okay? Now, if anyone is dissatisfied from something, then and can articulate it, if it feels like something is not being addressed.
Well,
Yeah?
in just terms of God. Like,
Yeah.
how could you ask someone to believe in something or a being that they can't why it does anything it does? How could you actually believe
Right. So that's a good question.
it? So aren't we supposed to learn about Hashem through his actions? So if we can't understand his actions, then nothing like that.
That's another good question.
This is like you're saying when we were doing these time, you can only believe in something you know. And this is what we asked them.
Right. So do you remember how I answered it then? I did, yeah. I answered that you can know that God exists, but knowing the nature of his existence is a different thing. Meaning you can establish that, let's say, like either through Torah Sinai or through like knowledge of the universe, like Rabbi Fader did, you know, that like this universe must have come from a cause that is intelligent in the sense of selected these particular variables in the laws of nature to produce a universe with structure, you know, or at Har Sinai, you can infer that there is something outside of the laws of nature that is controlling them, that did all of the miracles in Mitzrayim and that is communicating to Moshe. So you can know that God exists, but to have a positive conception of what he is, you can't have that. And similarly, that answers Emily's question also, because we can know that God does actions, and you can know that these actions come from that being, and you can understand how what role those actions play in the world, but you can't actually understand God's essence himself because he's non-physical.
But I feel like if you can't understand God, you're saying you can know that he exists, but you can't know like things about him, his ways.
Yeah, like I'll give you. I mean, this is an old. Because we see the natural world. I will give an old analogy, okay? And I'm sure you've heard this before. Like, let's say you go into a building that is beautifully designed and like ideally suited for its purposes. Like, let's say it's a school and like they have like a water filter right when you walk in, so that, you know, in a central location, and you're like, oh, this is so convenient, and like, you know, but it's beautiful though, okay? And you have this beauty. So you can know that it was made by an architect who was very skilled in architecture and who has knowledge of the needs of the people in the building that he built it for, okay? But let's say you don't know anything about his personal life, okay? But you see the quality of Chachma and architecture in the product, you know? And you know that those didn't come from chance, you know that those came from a cause. It's like that's the nature of the knowledge we can have about God, is we see the universe and we see everything functioning with perfect Chachma. So we know that this comes from God, and when we call God wise, we don't mean wise in the same way as a human being is wise. We know that this wisdom we perceive had a cause, and that cause is God, but we don't know anything about the nature of God's chachma. We just see the results. That's like the type of knowledge we can get, you know, about God. And it's only about God because we know that we can know that it comes from God, either through proof of Torah Sinai or proof of God through the universe. Okay, that's what I thought someone was going to be bothered by, right? What does this have to do with Iyov? Like, poor Iyov is still sitting there with boils and like 10 dead kids who like died in this horrible tragedy. Yeah. Okay. Good. So this.
God is just because you can't even know.
Oh, and this is another question. This is another question I thought someone was going to be bothered by. Whose does this answer sound like? So far. So the other question we have to have is, what's the difference between so far's answer, which is we can't know anything about God, and this? Okay. So this next piece is going to, I don't know, some years when I show this next part of the Rambam, people go like, what? That's cheap. Or like, that's amazing. Okay, so let's see what happens. Okay. So what do you call it? So this is the point we're at now, is like the whole point of the Sefer is to know that God's actions are different than our actions, blah, blah, blah. If man knows this, all afflictions will be experienced lightly by him, and misfortunes will not add to his doubts regarding Hashem and whether he does or does not know, and whether he exercises providence, hashgacha, or manifest withdrawal of providence. They will, to the contrary, increase his love, meaning man's afflictions will increase his love of God, As is said in the conclusion of the prophetic revelation in this book, this is a quote from Iyov, therefore I abhor my prior thoughts and I regret dust and ashes, meaning Iyov regretted saying all that stuff about God. As the sages of blessed memory have spoken about, those who do out of love and are joyful in afflictions. Okay, so first of all, what do you think he's saying before you say what your problem is?
He's saying that you can understand, and since you know that it's not the same thing as how we think it, you can just love him more because it's not, because you could assume that it's better than how we explain it.
Okay, and what will happen to the suffering? It'll go away. Okay, so let me just put up the summary and then you can object. Okay, if we internalize this idea, then we will be able to bear misfortune lightly without any wrong views about Hashem, and these afflictions will only add to our avas Hashem.
Are we saying that pain for us is different than
Almost. We're saying that if you understand this, then you will experience your pain differently.
So what is it to understand? It's not, his knowledge has nothing to do with your pain.
Okay, good question.
Pain is subjective.
Okay, also good question.
No, I think everyone would get pain by having a bus with them unless they have some weird
Like
genetic.
physical
Yeah,
pain.
so physical pain, right. So he's clearly not talking about physical pain, right? He's clearly, because physical pain you experience no matter what.
Like if anything, it won't add to your odds but diminish from it because every time something bad happens to you and you can't understand it, and you know, like we said, obviously Hashem comes from knowledge of science and
Yeah,
Torah or whatever.
right.
If you just can't understand God's ways, it will diminish from your obvious Hashem because you just are.
Okay, so
frustrated.
so you know what? I think we have sufficient questions now. But let's just start listing our questions here.
Also,
yeah.
Then how can we say there is reward and punishment? And how, like, why do we dive in for stuff?
How can we even
Okay,
say
hold on,
in
just a second.
general?
Uh,
he was
You can't
saying
attribute anything to
he was
Hashem.
saying like you could something about hashgacha versus like God removing himself from hashgacha.
Yeah.
Like the only way we understand it is through human terms. That like someone intervenes something and someone's just.
Okay.
Yeah.
On Rambam's. Okay, so let's list all the questions we have so far. Okay, so, oh, I thought I was typing the subject thing. There we go. Okay, so, what are the questions again? Just questions we just said down.
How is there justice? If this is the case?
How?
Is there justice?
Okay, is
Well,
What-
it is. It's not really-
let's just say, how does this change our view of Hashem's justice? Okay.
Yeah, because justice in our framework is different than in Hashem's
Right.
framework, but then there's no justice.
Yeah, you literally.
Okay,
Also, it's not even saying that
If-
you're trying to get justice for your thing. It's just.
okay,
bad because you don't.
Okay, good, good.
understand the terms.
okay. So
It has nothing to do with your-
okay, good. So that's the question I was hoping someone would ask, because I think that's my biggest problem with what the Rambam was saying, which is the Rambam. Oh, sorry, the Rambam only says that if you know this idea, then you will not suffer. But he seems to be sidestepping the question about whether such suffering is in line with justice, right? Wasn't our whole question, how could a just God let Iyov suffer? How does this answer that? Right? Is that the question?
Yeah, but it doesn't even. But it's like, is it saying that? Also, like, how are we supposed to? Are you just deriving this from like how they're trying to answer the question of where Eov's pain is coming from? Like, this doesn't really answer where his pain is coming from.
Okay, I'm gonna
It's
type
not even
down.
emotional pain. His kids died. Like, I think some.
Well, that's emotional pain.
Oh, it's only a psychopath. What's it called?
Sociopath?
Whatever they're called.
Yeah.
Like, it's not gonna feel hurt when their children die.
But it's still emotional.
Yeah, Leo, what was your question?
My question was, I had two. One was, how could this bring you to Avas Hashem?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
This leads to Ahavas Hashem.
Also,
Hold on a second. If Ahavas Hashem is in accordance is in proportion to our understanding of God's ways, and if the message of Sefer Iyov is that you can't understand God's ways, then how can instances of suffering increase your Avas Hashem? Yeah.
The question was,
Okay, so I wouldn't call that circular reasoning though. I would just call it a contradiction.
Yeah, I
What do
guess.
you mean?
Like when the Rambam says, even in his explanation of the answer, he says like, can you go back to it?
Yeah.
So I can read from it.
Stop sharing and let me just share the whole screen. The answer or the summary.
The answer.
So about the suffering part, this thing.
Yeah,
About the knowledge.
Yeah.
He says like, if man knows all of it, this all sufficient, whatever.
Oh, sorry, hold
And
on.
his virtues will not does. Whether he does or does not know, and whether he exercises providence or manifests withdrawal from providence.
Yeah,
Meaning he's saying you do or do not know whether, and then he's explaining a way in which God works. So you're basically contradicting yourself that you can't know how God's ways work, and then you're saying, oh, he does hashgacha, and then he withdraws from hashgacha, and he works through like nature.
right. Well, he's saying that he will. Let me just make sure we understand this. And misfortunes will not add to his doubts regarding Hashem and whether he does or does not know, and whether he exercises hashgacha or does not exercise hashgacha. Meaning that, like, that's the problem that most people have is they suffer misfortune, and then that throws them into doubt about whether God does have hashgacha or not. And what the Rambam is saying is if you have this idea, then misfortunes will not throw you into that doubt.
Right, but you can't have the doubt in the first place if you can't know God's ways.
And if you
Like if you
Can't
can't know
have the
how
doubt.
his hashgacha works, and you can't know how he does his carries out his things. The only way we understand him, like my understanding of him right now, is that he either works through hashgacha, direct intervention, or through the ways of nature which are already created.
Right.
Which obviously is our human understanding.
Right.
Like, you either like work through yourself directly or through some other system.
Right.
So that principle in and of itself, you can't understand it if you can't know God's ways.
Yeah, I think I'm starting to understand your question, but it's still slippery in my mind.
I don't know if want to help.
Are you saying that basically we can't understand like that we can't go into that doubt because we don't even know what the hashgacha is? That
Yeah.
we can't
Yeah.
say-
It's how
Okay,
David
so
did.
let me just package that question with another question that was asked, which was what is the difference between Sofar, who said we can't know anything about Hashem's ways, and between Elihu, who seems to be saying something similar about not being able,
About his hashgacha not being the same.
about his hashgacha not being the same, about his hashgacha, etc., not being the same as ours. And then here's where I'm gonna package your question is what can and can't we know about his hashgacha? Yeah. I know you're asking more than that, but that's like where your question is. Yeah, yeah.
Also,
Okay. Were there any other questions that were raised that we did not list?
Wasn't there one about Iyov himself, or did we already ask?
how did it
Yeah,
determine
I think we
that?
asked that up there. Let me just go back.
Yeah.
yeah, number 2.
Yeah, number 2. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, because the term is only. Also, is it only these specific ones? No, right? Is everything within?
It's a good question because you notice he kind of added terms as he went along. Like he started off with just saying God's hashgacha and hanhaga, then he added kavana, then he added yediyah.
Sounds like
You know?
everything, honestly.
It sounded what?
Sounds like everything.
Yeah, it does sound like everything, but it's also not all terms. These are all terms that have to do with like,
Well, yeah.
yeah, God's like, interaction with the world. Where did your question about the sociopath thing come from? Was that just a question of like, how does this work practically that your suffering is diminished?
Yeah.
Yeah.
because
Yeah, how?
You could add it to all.
He doesn't say the suffering is diminished. He says we will be
Oh,
able to
born
bear
lightly, yeah,
misfortune
yeah.
lightly.
Right. Okay, so
Everyone also has misfortune.
what?
No, actually, it says that you could deal with the pain and come out of it without like.
Yeah.
It says
Yeah. So let's just ask how that works practically, right? What exactly does it mean? Person will bear misfortune lightly and be joyful in misfortune. Like practically,
Even
how-
like emotional one, like, I
how
mean,
does this
actual-
work with? Yeah, yeah. So I'm just gonna add, and how is this a result? Is this a result of internalizing the message of Sefer? Okay. So I think what we should do is like this. So this is good. This is why I never know when I'm teaching this class which direction it'll take in terms of questions and stuff. So I need to think about how I want to organize the rest of the material and the Rambam's thing. We'll either continue this tomorrow if I have a good way to like segue from this part of the Rambam into your answers, or we'll do something else tomorrow, and then we'll come back to this on Wednesday. I found an answer to your question on why we value human life more than animal life.
Actually, or Pesach,
Oh,
you did? Oh, nice.
I want to hear your answer.
Okay, yeah, well, we could. I want to hear a Pesach, so we could talk about it. Yeah, that's good. Good. All right, nice. All right, let's stop here for today.
Yeah.
It ended up not so much on
It
that.
wasn't like you did it.